I'm the director of the World Cities Culture Forum, and I want to warmly welcome all of you to this webinar. It is called The Rise of the Creative Land Trust Movement. We've got a great panel for you together today, and today also we're launching the new practical guide to a creative land trust. And you can download the guide on the chat. I think it will appear on your screens, and you can download it today from our website. It's a fantastic guide to looking at how to create this new model, Creative Land Trust. We encourage you to send us questions for the panel using Slido. So scan the QR code. That's it. Now it's on the screen. And send us your questions. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. We have people joining from across 136 different cities today. This is a record for a webinar, World Cities Culture Forum. We've got people from Mumbai, Tokyo, Mexico, Johannesburg, Jakarta, Berlin, Lima, and many, many more. Welcome to you all. Thanks for joining. But before we start, a few words about World Cities Culture Forum. It was set up in 2012 by the Mayor of London. We are the leading network of global cities and culture. We are over 45 cities across 5 continents, and we represent about 280 million people and about 60 UNESCO heritage sites. We believe that culture is a key ingredient for a successful city. We call it the golden thread, because we believe that culture contributes to a city success, all aspects of urban life, from jobs and tourism to making us healthier and happier. And it's key to a city's identity. Our cities share their best ideas, and we support them to fast-track solutions. And today, we're talking about one of those good ideas that are spreading across our cities. We've been supporting this movement for the past 10 years. We've awarded 2 Leadership Exchange Program awards for cities to learn from each other to setting up creative land trusts. And now we have 12 cities in our network exploring how to set up creative land trusts. The Leadership Exchange Program is our flagship program, and it's funded, kindly supported by Bloomberg Philanthropies. And I want to give a shout out and thank you so much for the support. Today, we're talking about creative land trusts. And to frame the conversation, I'll just set out 3 key points as way of context. Number 1, more and more we live in cities. And in fact, by 2030, 8 out of 10 people will live in cities. So as cities grow fast, one of the urgent issues rising is the cost of land and property. Number 2, as living costs arise, artists and creatives are finding it more difficult to live and work in cities. And finally, number 3, we are seeing the decline of creative space in our cities. And that's workspace, venues, community spaces. And in that context, that's why we say, thankfully, we've got the Creative Land Trust, because it offers an innovative solution. Our panel today, we have experts to tell us what it is and how it works. And I want to start with Shelley. Welcome, Shelley. You are the Executive Director of the Kenneth Rainin Foundation. Hi, Shelley. Good morning. It's morning in San Francisco. You are the pioneers, really. You're the founding partners of CAST, the Community Arts Stabilization Trust in San Francisco, which was set up in 2013. And last month, you hosted the first Creative Land Trust Summit in San Francisco, bringing together cultural leaders and founders from 20 cities. It was convened by the wonderful Michelle Tebet at Left Bank, and World Cities Culture Forum were collaborators. So I want to ask you a bit of a 2-pronged question. One is, tell us a bit about the origin of setting up CAST. Why set up CAST, and how did it work? And also share with us your takeaways from the summit that you've hosted recently in San Francisco. Over to you, Shelley, and great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Leah. I am thrilled to be in this conversation with you all. It's so exciting to have the number of cities present today and really across the world who are doing this incredible work. So as you said, I'm Shelley Trott. I'm the executive director of the Kenneth Rainin Foundation, and we're a private family foundation in Oakland, California. And we are a philanthropic organization. So we have a mission, and our mission is to enhance quality of life. And we do that by championing the arts, by also promoting early childhood literacy and supporting research to cure chronic disease. But our arts funding is focused on ensuring that Bay Area artists have the resources they need to create and thrive, and to support models like the Community Arts Stabilization Trust to address systemic barriers such as land control to unleash creativity in our cities. And given that we're talking about land, I think it's important, and I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Lijan Ohlone people, who have lived in Oakland and cared for this land for thousands of years. My connection to the Creative Land Trust movement is that in addition to working in philanthropy, I am an artist. And I've lived through 2 technology booms and displacement crises in the Bay Area. The first that I experienced was in 2000 during the dot-com boom. It was a wild time in the Bay Area, kind of felt like the Wild West again, and money came pouring into the region. And the dance community at the time lost almost all of its studios, except for one. And the one that wasn't displaced by a dot-com survived because the artists owned their building. The second displacement crisis started in 2012. The tech.com boom had gone bust, but then it was starting to kind of take off again. And so in 2012, there was another technology boom looming. And this time I was working in philanthropy. And so I had access to resources that we could use to do something about it. And we saw the signs of the looming crisis based on my experience as an artist in 2000. And we began exploring the ways the foundation could help to disrupt the cycle of displacement. And we spoke to a lot of people who worked to protect the creative spaces back then and learned that most of the solutions were temporary, that we had merely kicked the can down the road. So of course, we found ourselves here again, facing another displacement crisis. So we knew we had to do things differently. We had to find a way to help artists and arts organizations own the land beneath their feet. So we worked with a local organization, a community development financial institution, to develop the business model for the Community Arts Stabilization Trust. And that was meant to support artists and arts organizations to buy property and sustain ownership permanently. And Ken Ikeda from CAST is on today, so he'll talk more about what CAST does and how it works. And I'll move on to kind of the hopes and objectives that we had in convening the first Creative Land Trust Summit in San Francisco. It was meaningful to convene that group in San Francisco because that's where I think this model was first highlighted by the World Cities Culture Forum back in 2018, and how this movement began. And so we were thrilled most recently to learn that so many cities around the world had been inspired by CAST. And Michelle Tabbitt, who you mentioned, had been following and supporting the Creative Land Trust movement for years. And she reached out to me and proposed that we host this inaugural summit to connect the various practitioners from, at this time, almost 20 cities around the world. And the World Cities Culture Forum and Justine Simons had sparked the global movement by highlighting CAST and London's Creative Land Trust in their communications and events. And we understood that this is still, while it's been happening for a while, this is still a very young and emergent field. The work is very complex. So we wanted to give these intrepid leaders an opportunity to share and learn from one another in person, not in little boxes on screens, which is how we tend to connect when we're all so far apart these days. And we hoped to seed an international community of practice that would support and empower those already that are in the trenches, and to inspire others to establish creative land trusts or adapted models in their cities. And I'll just say that the word that best describes the summit for me is electric. When everybody came together over the 3.5 days we spent together, it was just next level. Attendees were just absolutely thrilled to be with like-minded creative problem solvers, and were hungry to learn from each other. And especially, I'll say, from the trailblazers like Artspace in Minneapolis or Artscape in Toronto. And so it was really clear that this community of practice was already happening, and we wanted to level up the work through collective knowledge and to build a library of tools and resources, including the Creative Land Trust Summit Toolkit that you all created. And one takeaway that was very clear above and beyond the community of practice and the tools and resources that everybody needs to continue this work is that we need more funding and creative financing structures to scale and sustain this movement. So now post-summit, we'll be building some infrastructure to support the community and think about how to bring partners together to continue to convene and expand this group. And we're just so grateful to be connected to you all, the World Cities Culture Forum, and to promote the Creative Land Trust Toolkit as an exciting and essential resource. So thank you, Leah.
Thank you so much. I love that journey from artist to philanthropist, and then sort of this electric global movement that, as you say, is a young field, but also there's a lot of people already working on it, and it's such a, as you say, privilege to bring these people together and support. And we'll pick up on some of the areas that you've mentioned around funding, for example, because that's one of the innovative tools. But you've mentioned the wonderful Kenny Kidder. So now I want to bring in Kenny Kidder, who's the CEO of CAST. Your work clearly at CAST is inspirational. In 2024 alone, you've secured 86,000 square feet of creative space in the Bay Area, and you've got another 100,000 in the pipeline, and you're helping community groups secure space. So Ken, from your perspective, tell us, can you unpack how does CAST work for those who don't know about who are new to CAST? How does it work? And also, you were part of this inaugural summit in San Francisco. So also, what are your takeaways? Was it electric, and what were your takeaways from that?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm thrilled meeting with everyone virtually. And I think, just want to acknowledge that I'm relatively new to CAST, and the work that we're engaged in now is really on the shoulders of those who preceded me and my colleagues. So as I talk, I'm going to hopefully be able to share some imagery of buildings in our portfolio. The first here is Counterpulse, which is the dance organization that Shelley was talking about. That it was our first project as CAST that we were able to secure their sustainability in a sense. And I'm going to go back to that word over and over again. But Counterpulse in 2023 fully purchased this building back in a lease-to-own scenario from CAST and has 100% equity of this property site. But let me take a step back really quickly. I want to give a brief description of CAST, the sort of the who, what, and how. As Shelley mentioned, just sort of our origin story, we're effectively a nonprofit real estate development organization. And in this particular case, what that means on a practical level is that we provide capacity support, capital strategies, capacity towards raising capital and securing capital. And we generally participate as an equity partner long-term in the acquisition of sites. But we don't just grab buildings and build them and invite people in. We work in partnership always. We don't work alone. And so we often talk about how we wrap space around programs and mission. And that's really, I think, key in describing how we approach sites, how we approach opportunities. And I'll talk more specifically about how CAST work as we go through slides. We can go to the next one, please. And I think I'm going to do that through reflecting on the summit itself, which this is going to seem simple, but it was truly profound. And that's this realization that we're not alone, that we're part of a community, because so much of what we talk about in terms of our methodology, our approach to work is to work with and through community. So to find ourselves as part of a young field felt really extraordinary. And the second thing is that we are in fact young. Shelley referenced when we were founded in 2013, we're just 12 years old. And, you know, in the last 12 years, we've seen these unbelievable events that we couldn't possibly foresee. So we had the pandemic, of course, which introduced all this virtual learning and Zoom and our life that way. And in the US, even recently, in the last few months, you know, we've seen a complete disruption of federal funding and support and value of the arts, right? It's been a test of our Constitution, frankly. And so extraordinary things can happen in a short period of time. So what we talk about a lot at CAST about is sustainability. This notion that our mission is to acquire sustained, affordable space. That's a generational promise. And yet the way in which we operate as a nonprofit and most organizations, particularly arts operators, you know, we talk often about 3-year strategic plans, 5-year plans, even 10-year planning for an organization feels audacious. But when we're talking about the outcomes that we seek as CAST and our peers seek in this space, 12 years is nothing. And so we've been giving a lot of thought to that. What does it mean? You know, if you go next slide, please. This is a image of a place called Geneva Powerhouse in Car Barn. It's actually owned by the city of San Francisco. It went through a complete redesign from the ground up and a retrofit. It's a relatively small space, and we partnered with a group called Performing Arts Workshop, and they're the anchor tenant to do programming there. The back half of this building, which is historic, remains untouched. It's boarded up, and this is on a very, very prominent corner of a San Francisco neighborhood that is not downtown, but it's a central hub because of the public transportation for this neighborhood. If you go to the next slide for me. Great. And this is a different scale in San Jose, California, which is really the heart of Silicon Valley. Although San Francisco makes that claim, really Silicon Valley is based south of San Francisco. And this is in East San Jose. It's the School of Arts and Culture. It's a campus. And this is a group that we helped with their equity to acquire the space. And they've effectively become full-blown developers. They purchased the entire block across the street, which is vacant. And they're looking at housing and enterprise. And if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, and I wanted to end on this slide. So this is the Warfield Commons, the Warfield building. It's historic. It's over 100 years old. And so when we talk about sustainability, we talk about how CAST plans its work. We acquired this building with an anchor partner, KLW Public Media, which is one of the NPR providers in the Bay Area, National Public Radio. And we've talked about this as a group, and we've made this very public. This is a 9-story promise to the city of San Francisco and the Bay Area. And we talk about this as a promise because we have no guarantees, right? This building is over 100 years old. Again, we often do planning in 3 to 5, and even 10-year increments, but we're talking about forever. So instead, we have really been focused on intentions and promises because we have no guarantees. And so I sort of want to end on this high level note as other folks are doing this work or considering doing this work, right? You have to have a strong belief, right? That if you ground something in community ownership, if you imagine something with community, that it will, to a certain degree, be sustainable. But we are working actively now to rethink our metrics of time. So I think I'll end on that note and move more towards Q&A, but just this idea that, you know, we're working through promises and intentions.
Also, this lab forever is the forever timeline, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we're here into. Like we're saying hardwiring this ownership model so communities and culture can own the land and own the property, and this is a forever model. I love it, and I love that you describe CAST as, it's a non-profit real estate organization that in itself feels like a bit of an oxymoron, but that's what you are. You are not-for-profit real estate organization, and I love the examples from a small arts venue to a big campus. I now want to introduce Megan Wells. Thank you. We'll come back to you later on the panel. Megan, welcome from Austin. Megan is a long-standing collaborator from World Cities Culture Forum. You participated in the Leadership Exchange program on this subject. You are Special Liaison for Economic Development and Culture at the City of Austin, and you hold sort of a unique role between the city and this new organization called Rally Austin, which is a public-private partnership. And it's a slightly different model than San Francisco, which is what's interesting, that each city is sort of taking this model and making it its own. Already, Rally Austin has invested over $20 million to securing creative space in Austin, saving music venues, iconic music venues like the Hole in the Wall. So from your city perspective, Megan, and particularly a city like Austin that has seen this sort of rapid growth, how did you transfer the model? How did you adapt the model? Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'll first kind of set the stage with a little bit of context about the issue and the problem in Austin. There we go. Excellent. And if you can go on to the next slide here. Great. So really, Austin has built our identity around innovation and experimentation, and we've created this cool, creative vibe. But this has spurred explosive growth in our city for the last 2 decades. We were the fastest growing metro area in the US 12 years in a row, from 2009 to 2021. And we only slipped down to number 2 in 2022 and 2023. But Austin's vibrant and weird creative community was incubated in a city that no longer exists. Gone are the days of low-cost living and workspaces. Our real estate market bubble has yet to really burst. Property taxes are high and rising, and we are not an industrial city that has warehouses or vacant production spaces to redevelop. Most creative organizations here do not own their spaces, and therefore they're at the mercy of landlords and property owners, with a bottom line that could be substantially enriched by redevelopment or sales. The economic divide has also widened locally. Austin now has 32,000 millionaires and 10 billionaires and is considered the 10th wealthiest city in the nation. Despite that, though, Austin experiences a serious lack of philanthropic or corporate giving, especially to arts and culture. Local government is the #1 funder of creative activity in the city, which is simultaneously wonderful and problematic. Adding to that, human behavior is shifting away from revenue from alcohol sales, especially in music venues, rising costs of insurance, and lasting COVID impacts on visitor numbers, and an undersupply of affordable housing, and it's a recipe for cultural extinction. All of this probably sounds very familiar to many of you in cities experiencing these kinds of growing pains. Next slide. So our solution. In October of 2020, after many years of recognizing the mounting challenges posed by escalating real estate prices, the City of Austin established the Austin Economic Development Corporation. Now that organization has rebranded itself as Rally Austin. It is a local government corporation that functions as a public real estate developer that works on behalf of the city to generate community benefit rather than profit. It can accept philanthropic donations, utilize revenue bond financing, manage private investments, and engage in public real estate development and public-private partnerships on behalf of the city and our community. The first program to launch within Rally's portfolio was the Cultural Trust, which aims to preserve existing cultural venues and establish new permanently affordable ones through acquisitions, long-term leases, loans, and other creative deal structures to ensure long-term ownership or tenancy. Raleigh Austin assumes initial site control of properties in order to negotiate better long-term leases, facilitate construction improvements for revenue generation, ensure affordability through long-term operator agreements or subleases, negotiate restrictive covenants for creative use, and building out and managing new spaces in city-owned properties. They're also growing a technical assistance program on real estate and are offering advice to help organizations develop their own guidelines for accessibility, affordability, and governance in service of equity, inclusion, and long-term sustainability. Next slide. As I mentioned, the first round of the Cultural Trust Program investments commenced in 2022 through a request for proposals from the community. The city contributed an initial budget of nearly $20 million in funding for this phase. 5 years after its inception, Raleigh Austin has leveraged that initial city investment with an additional $7.5 million of matching project funds and now oversees a portfolio of real estate projects that is anticipated to provide over 250,000 square feet of affordable space and generate an estimated $300,000 in economic impact. The focus has achieved deep affordability and long-term preservation of several important spaces. To highlight just a few achievements, and you can see some of these in the photos on the screen, they have successfully negotiated a new 20-year lease for the Hole in the Wall, which is a beloved music venue that has served the University of Texas area since the early 1970s. They have secured the Texas Historical Landmark status for the Broken Spoke, which is a nationally recognized dance hall and music venue. They have contributed $5 million towards new facility construction and capital campaigns for 2 anchor performance institutions, Austin Playhouse and the Museum of Human Achievement. And they are finishing out a flexible art space within the city's building that houses the permitting and development functions. It is going to be a small, flexible theater space. With these early wins, Raleigh Austin is positioning itself as a leader with other partners, locally, nationally, and internationally, to test innovative solutions that protect Austin's identity as a creative capital. Next slide. And I'll close with just sharing some learning and advice that we have formed through Austin's local experience, as well as through conversations with colleagues at the recent summit. What we've come to realize is securing permanently affordable and accessible creative and cultural space equitably is an emerging specialized professional field of practice. But each project is unique. There's no one way of doing things. There are many ways of supporting affordable permanent cultural space, and not all fit into a land trust model. Raleigh Austin is using long-term leases, capital improvements, gap financing, and other tools while positioning itself to acquire property in the market in the future. Scale, many times bigger is better. Larger projects can provide diversified revenue to help support the affordability of smaller elements. However, often the capital to acquire and build at a larger scale is not available at the start of these projects, and that can be a challenge for us. So advice that I could offer, try to identify and carve out funds for a technical assistance program for the community. You're going to want to teach people how to fish, as well as give them resources to continue the journey. As a startup, there is a constant need to tend the garden, making sure there is unity among policymakers, practitioners, and the community around shared goals, expectations, definitions, and measurements of success and support. This means working hard to maintain communication, trust, and buy-in by all your stakeholders. Capitalize on your successes, celebrate your wins. And one last observation, the hallmark of this work seems to be constant learning, willingness to try new things, fail or succeed, and then keep trying new things. Our world continues to change, and sometimes all we need is others to help us going, keep the work going. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Laia.
Thank you so much, Megan. I think what's interesting is slightly difficult, but what's good is that it is also sort of a third-party organization. It sits slightly outside the city, And what you say is it's got to be flexible. It's not one size fits all. Sometimes will be ownership, sometimes will be loans, sometimes will be sort of filling that financial gap. And also the role of leveraging, the role that that organization has on leveraging. We'll talk more about the financing models. I think there's already some questions on the chat that are interested about this blended sort of financing model. But before we do so, I want to bring our last speaker, which is Erica Henneberry from Toronto. Erica, you're an urban planner and you're a creative yourself. And you've written a chapter on Creative Land Trust, which I'm just shamelessly going to flog, which is on this book that we've collaborated in. World Cities Culture Forum is a collaborator. It's the Routledge Handbook of Urban Cultural Planning. And there's a chapter dedicated to Creative Land Trust that Erica wrote. But you're also sort of a policymaker, if you want. And your role in the City of Toronto as Senior Cultural Affairs Officer means that you are working in that sort of sphere of saving spaces, securing spaces. And Toronto, we've said that before, I think both Ken and Shelley mentioned, has a rich history of sort of supporting community and creative space. In fact, our first leadership exchange program meant we took 10 cities to visit Toronto and learn from Toronto. So you're an urban planner. From an urban planning perspective, again, what does it work? How does this model of community ownership, why is it so valuable? Tell us about your story on this.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's so amazing to hear about these projects that are happening in other places that I really look up to and admire. So it's really incredible to be here today. So thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that I do with the City of Toronto and also share some insights from the research that I've been doing on what I would call cultural CLTs, community land trusts that are focused on cultural space. Yeah, I'm a planner, but I do have an arts and culture background and in fact have managed many cultural spaces in the city over time. Urban planning is kind of my second career. So I work in a team at the City of Toronto that's called the Office for Cultural Space. And we focus on policy, planning, capital projects, and program development to really protect and grow cultural spaces in the city. And we have a whole bunch of different initiatives that we're working on. Most recently, one of the projects was a new culture plan, and that is called Culture Connects, an action plan for culture in Toronto, led by my amazing colleagues Mojan and Ben. And we're now working on a cultural infrastructure strategy led by my very amazing colleague, Dan, who's sitting a couple seats down from me right now. Shout out, Dan, for coming today. And so, yeah, one of the key targets of this culture plan is 1 million net new square feet of cultural space. And we have a number of tools that we use to secure and acquire cultural space. Some of them are planning tools through height and density bonusing, and some of them are partnership projects on city-owned lands. And so we're sort of trying to support cultural community land trusts also through some of the work in implementing this culture plan. But I want to share a little bit some of the insights from the research for the Handbook of Urban Cultural Planning, and thanks to the amazing editors, Rana Amirtamasevi and Jason Schubach. And I wish I could hold the book up, but I don't actually have a copy of it yet. But yeah, the chapter that I wrote on cultural CLTs builds on some work by a couple different scholars. One is a legal scholar, Sarah Ross, who's based in Nova Scotia, actually, and she's been working on some legal models for land trusts and talking about how they can help prevent displacement. And also this really amazing book I want to share called The Cultural Infrastructure of Cities by Alison Bain and Julie Podmore. There's a chapter here about studio provision in London through the Creative Land Trust. It's really interesting work. So this kind of builds upon that. So one of the things I think that is a really interesting subject right now in the sector, the land trust sector, is definitions and the sort of legal framework. How are we defining, how are we scoping this? What is a land trust? What is not a land trust? what is a community land trust? So community land trust to me would be a nonprofit community-based organizations that acquire and steward land for the benefit of place-based community. So that definition is definitely being stretched with the sort of adaptation of the model to different types of land trusts and different types of configurations. Some of the key features I want to bring forward is community stewardship, that CLTs are governed by a board of directors that are elected by a membership. So the membership structure is really important. And then that sort of classic CLT model, a tripartite membership, which includes CLT tenants and community members, as well as broader stakeholders like, real estate experts, lawyers, and people like that. So it helps to balance the power. And I think that's a really important feature. Another feature is that CLTs are really anti-capitalist. They're fundamentally anti-capitalist. They take land permanently off of the speculative real estate market. They decommodify land. They prioritize use value over exchange value. So they are quite political entities. And I think that's really important to remember. Affordability is a really important feature of community land trusts, that they are not-for-profit corporations that prioritize affordability. Needs to really be front and center, that they reinvest revenues back into the CLT, and those revenues can be used for all types of different things like capital projects or leasehold improvements, repair and maintenance, things like that, but also they can be used for acquisition and for expansion. So the idea of recycling revenues is really important function. And that they're place-based and community-based, that they're based in either a geography, whether that's, one unit of a building, one neighborhood, one city, or even a larger region, but that they're place-based and they're focused on a community. Another feature is that CLTs effectively prevent displacement. They prevent eviction. And even some CLTs have really amazing programs to help tenants cure any minor defaults and prevent them from being evicted. And that's really supportive of the most vulnerable, the lowest income tenants. So that's, I think, a really important piece as well. And that they community land trusts serve community by providing affordable, stable arts and cultural space. So some recommendations that I came up with in this chapter include the development in collaboration with the sector of the CLT sector and the arts and culture sector to develop a legal definition and also develop some programs for tax benefits. The City of Toronto offers a couple of programs, property tax rebate programs and things like that we help with startup funding, that we help with operational funding, and then with acquisition assistance. And the more recent example was the City of Toronto assisted the Community and Cultural Spaces Trust through their work with the In Spirit Foundation as another partner to acquire their first 2 units, which are in a commercial condominium building. So, sorry, am I out of time already?
Read the chapter. Also, there's some of these top tips on the practical guideline. You've touched on sort of the governance and the complexity of the governance and the complexity of these new legal entities. They're new types of organizations, aren't they? So how they're set up legally, and it will change in every city. And then the complexity of stakeholders is already been touched by some of the other speakers. What I love as well is that more and more cities have people like you in a dedicated role to supporting creative organizations with the understanding. We've got that understanding, and you will have the understanding of the creative needs, but also the planning legislation. How can the planning legislation support these types of organizations? Thank you, Erica. Before we go to lots of questions, which is brilliant, and I'm going to pick some of them to go back to the panel. But before we do that, we've got a video message from our colleague Lisa Colley from Sydney, who are about to set up the new Creative Land Trust in Sydney. I hope we've got the video ready. Lisa, take it away.
The key challenges that Sydney are facing are affordable spaces for artists to work, but also to live. The research that we have done has shown that Sydney has actually lost its artists at 3 times the rate of every capital city in Australia over the last 5 years, and that is a really big issue for us, and that's the one that we're trying to address. We now have the political commitment from both our state government and the city to establish a Creative Land Trust. We're looking at the feasibility of that right now, but the big commitment for us was that both the city and the state agreed to transfer property into the trust. And our ambition is that that initial investment by the city will grow over time, and we will actually be able to address the diminishing space for creatives in Sydney. What we've been able to communicate is that artists are so critical to the spirit and soul and economy of our city that we need to make sure that they can actually live in proximity to where they actually need to do and produce their work. And we just achieved last week in a private development 16 units for affordable housing for artists. 4 of them will be rent controlled, so definitely targeting that demographic of artists on low income, and the others will be more targeted to the kind of creative workforce, you know, who are working in industries like our film industry, performing arts industry and so on. There are a number of cities that have really inspired us in this journey. Our colleagues in London have been an incredible inspiration to us, but also a big shout out, of course, to CAST here in San Francisco, who are the origin story of Creative Land Trust type model. But also another city that really inspired us that was really surprising was Helsinki in Finland. And finding out about the work that they've done there over the last 30 years and the model that they have. I would never have known about that if it hadn't been for the World Cities Culture Forum and the summit that was held in Helsinki. And that's the power of this kind of international network that we have, that we get to really learn from people who've gone before us, and it's definitely accelerated the work that we're doing in Sydney.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And that speaks to the power of collaboration and networks and camaraderie. There's real camaraderie in this area. I wanted to do a bit of questions. There's lots of really interesting questions on the chat. So I'm just going to pick a few and try to bring them together. I'm going to go to Shelley and Ken. There's quite a lot of questions around the financing model and this sort of blended finance and the role of philanthropy and how do you get started. I think it's interesting that we've moved to a more like structural fund. What Shelley was referring at the beginning is like you've got to own the land below your feet. So rather than programmatic funding, so how does that translate? How can people learn more about those sort of blended aspects of sort of financing and getting started? And then I'll move to Megan and Erica. There's questions around what's the role of the city in the sort of letting go of ownership. But Shelley, Ken, I don't know if one of you wants to pitch in on this sort of blended finance model, which is innovative.
I'll start briefly with the philanthropic role, and then Ken could follow on maybe about more creative financing tools. But philanthropy really can provide the seed capital, the catalytic capital, the proof of concept capital that can really get this work going. And it can also de-risk. So it de-risks through loan guarantees and program-related investments. There's convening power of philanthropy. There's also public will and partnering with government in different ways. So philanthropy has several roles, but working in deep partnership with community, with this type of intermediary, the Creative Land Trust or Community Art Stabilization Trust model, and with peer funders.
Great.
I'll add to that. We're in a moment in real estate, at least in the US, in major urban centers, where we're buying buildings potentially at 80 to 90% discount to what they were. So when a building that's 100,000 square feet used to be $60-70 million, which is a number that far exceeds what most foundations could ever participate in or address on their own, we're able to now acquire those buildings for $7-8 million. And so then philanthropy's participation is really, really instrumental, right? Because they can provide the first dollars towards equity. And then the balance can actually be financed. So it is a debt scenario, but the arts and culture dollar is just as good as any other dollar. And when you've reduced the operating costs and the debt by that much, you reset the floor of affordability. So then you can even cash flow that borrowing at 60, 70% occupancy of a building and not 100%. So we're currently in a moment that is really unique in our lifetimes, or I'll speak to my lifetime in the real estate market. But the other thing I'll say is, the Rainin Foundation and obviously under Shirley's leadership, there's this high level understanding, but they played a critical role in providing a guarantee to our partner arts organization in order for them to participate and have equity. And that was very, very, very important, because I think, again, I'm only half joking when I say our dollar is just as good as any other dollar, because I think there's still some question about, is this a safe or smart investment? And I think that's an uphill narrative battle we have. It's not a functional one. We've proven that it is sustainable by any other metric. Yeah, I'll leave it there. But I think there's more than one way to do this. And the current market provides opportunities for tons of different people at different levels to participate.
That's really encouraging. And it's sort of, the model is evolving, isn't it? It's like we're still in, as you were saying, we're still early stages of this model. It's interesting that the role of philanthropy to de-risking and putting that initial sort of trust in the trust. And then that enables, that leverages sort of, it generates more trust in others. That's really, really interesting to see. And we've seen that certainly here in London as well. There's a question about what is the role of cities and city governments. Erica, Megan, who both sort of city government people, what do you think is the role? What are the arguments? How do you put together that package? Megan first, and then Erica.
Yeah, sure. I think this is a great question. I mentioned earlier in my comments that there's a need to tend the garden. And really, this concept revolves around the fact that for any of Raleigh Austin's work to really succeed, there has to be the policy and political support at the city level at the very start. And that means, the cultural sustainability and vibrance are part of the long-term city comprehensive plan. They are rooted in city values and goals and tied to its strategic outcomes. And this is just another way to achieve that. But that political will to support a startup, which is kind of what our local government corporation is really vital to ensure that it grows. There are so many changes that happen politically and with as cities run, that it's really crucial to maintain a sustainability and a continuity so that the work of the startup can continue. And that includes things like ensuring that there's funding from the city to seed projects, possible transfers of city property to the local government corporation, and then making sure that admin and regulatory processes are as smooth as possible. And really my role as the liaison between the city and Raleigh Austin is to ensure that this kind of lubrication is happening, to make sure that the wheels of this machine are turning, as smoothly and as quickly as possible. And that these stakeholders, there are so many stakeholders to keep unified, are really all on board. They're all participating in this iterative process of developing this entity to the best of our ability. So there's a lot of sort of things to keep on the radar, but making sure that the garden continues to be weeded and sown and watered is really crucial.
I love the metaphor. I love a metaphor. Mend the garden, and also, for government to be agile and to be responsive. I think that's what these organizations are.
Absolutely, that's not a place where government likes to sit, and so it's sort of pushing government to be different.
That's right. So it forces the government to be agile and responsive. Erica, what from your perspective, what do you see the role of a city government?
I think
political will, as Megan was saying.
I mean, on the political will side, we're really lucky right now. We're in an incredible environment, and where we actually have a lot of really staff that are really willing to go out on a limb and try something really different, really flexible, really innovative thinking. And in the housing sector, we've done like a couple of really amazing projects where we've transferred, over 600 properties from the city's housing agency to community land trusts over the last few years. And in the cultural sector, we've done projects where we enter into like a long-term ground lease for 50 years with an organization to develop on city land. Like Blackhurst Cultural Center is a really great example of that. We also have a really excellent community state-based tenancy program where nonprofit organizations can have a nominal lease. So they don't have to pay rent, they just have to cover their costs. So we have a lot to choose from. And we have some still planning tools, although those have been worn down quite a lot with the conservative provincial government in place. But we do have a lot of tools that we use, and they have been really effective.
Great. So we've got lots of other questions. There's a question around, looks like this model works in North America and Australia and Europe. Can it work in other places? There's a question about how do we see creative land trusts working together? I'm going to come back to those two questions, but before we do that, we've got a video from our friends in Helsinki, Capelli, which is another model that actually Lisa Colley mentioned in her video. So if we can see their video and see yet another model, and this time in Europe. Over to Capelli.
Capelli is a cultural center operator situated in Helsinki in Finland. And what we do is that we recycle former industrial buildings for cultural use. The first one that we took over in the beginning of the 1990s was a former Nokia cable factory, and now it has been reconverted to cultural use. And since then we've taken over also two other industrial sites, former gas and electricity plant and the former pharmaceutical factory. And all in all, we have maybe 650 tenants and roughly 1.5 million people visit our centers on a yearly basis. We have as our tenants individual artists, we have cultural organizations, we have cultural institutions like museums, we have creative industry companies, and then we have performance venues. So at Capelli, we never talk about taking over industrial space for cultural use on a temporary basis. Because if you talk about temporary use, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we always take these spaces on a permanent basis for cultural use. Artists, they are revitalizing our societies. We need to be sure that they have good conditions to work and they have places to work. We want to make sure that our spaces are used in the most efficient way possible, and it's important that we support the artistic community as well as we can.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I just want to go back to that question about, it seems this is a model that has been adapted in North America and Australia and Europe. Can you see this being adapted to other continents? Would this work in other continents? What do we think? Obviously, this is a bit of a sort of hypothetical question, but do we think that that's got the flexibility to adapt? Question. Ken, do you want to start on this?
Yeah, I would just say absolutely. Without even understanding where it is, I think there are certainly a lot of rules that are shared with us about real estate regarding scale, returns, and things like that. But I think fundamentally, we've also seen great examples of very small efforts that I can see be replicated, even the larger ones. So to be more specific, I think governance is a critical piece. From a grassroots perspective, it's obviously critical to the land trust structure as well, generationally in particular, with artists who found a space and a collective and establish a trust, and then they move on or they pass away, and what happens to the next generation caretaking for that. But what I would say is that fundamentally, you have a economic and cultural impact argument to make. And wherever you are, you have a place of comparison with other investments in that community. And so I think we need to really develop our cultural narrative power as a sector and apply it locally because it is compelling. You know, I think virtually everywhere we go, arts and culture provide the heartbeat, the compelling reason why someone feels attached to an area, how they see themselves in the community and become a part of it. And I think we need to leverage that more towards investment.
Great. And there's already a collective, a community. So, and it seems to be, it's a very supportive community. Shelley, where do you see this community? It says, how do you see, how do you think about the potential for land trusts working together?
I mean, I saw it absolutely at the Creative Land Trust Summit. I mean, you see some of the leaders of this work here speaking today, and they're just, as I said, intrepid, courageous leaders who are really willing to share everything they've learned, everything they've done, their successes, their failures, in service of this movement and continuing this work. And I do think that you can adapt it to many cities, many locales. It is hyper-local. It is, what constellation of resources do you have in your city, in your community, that you can bring to bear, because it is also highly collaborative. And to Ken's point, that governance is essential. Who's leading, who's advocating. Yeah, so I see a lot of potential, and I think there are some examples coming out of the summit of cities working together more closely, collaborating more closely, that you'll see in the future.
Excellent. That's what we like to see at World Cities Culture Forum. We see it as a family of cities helping each other and getting better, helping each other at replicating and adapting the models and getting it better and better every time that you run it. We're running out of time, so it's been fantastic. It's been super, super interesting. Thank you to everyone who sent questions. I'm sorry we haven't got to all of them, but we'll pick up all those questions. Check our practical guide, and as this model develops, we intend to evolve that practical guide. So we'll take some of that questions and we'll adapt them and put them into our guide as we update the guide. But I think we've learned so much. We've said, you know, it's a model that adapts to each city, is a young field, it's complex, it's got potential to spread in other continents. The principles of ownership, the principles of blended funding, the importance of philanthropy, the importance of political will, and the importance of partnership. And, you know, the importance of that collective community of practice. So we'll leave it here. Thank you, Shelley, Ken, Megan, Erica, for your time and your generosity. And Lisa, and in Helsinki as well, our colleagues sending videos. Also, big thanks for our team, particularly Catherine Thornton and Annika Ali, who's been behind the scenes. And a big thank you to all of you for tuning in. Download the practical guide, follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, check our newsletter, join us, stay tuned. This is definitely an area of lots of interest, and we'll be doing more work. Thank you very much and have a good day.